The date is December 21st, 1939. A crowd of people surrounded the Carthy Circle Theater in Los Angeles, waiting excitedly to see the newest release from Walt Disney Productions. The movie in question, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. This movie was special because it was the first of its kind. Until now, Disney had been known for making animated short films and cartoons, but this was going to be the first cel-animated feature film, a dream that almost cost Disney everything. But it paid off. Even during the release, people knew this would change everything. The at-the-time manager of the theater, Roy Ducerne, reported that pre-sale tickets for Snow White had sold more than any other film in the theater's history. Over 30,000 people who couldn't get their hands on a $5 ticket stood outside of the theater just to be a part of the historic event. Inside the theater, audiences were dazzled with nearly 2 million individual paintings made by over 750 artists over the course of 3 years of tireless work. The visual spectacle of this new medium was truly awe-inspiring. Not to mention the solid story, memorable characters, and musical numbers. The film was loved by audiences and critics alike. At the 11th Annual Academy Awards, Walt Disney was presented with an honorary Oscar they called a Special Award. This was a full-sized Oscar statue accompanied by 7 dwarf-sized ones. Snow White was a huge success for Disney, bringing in $8.5 million at the box office. This would be around $181 million today. Not only did Snow White save the Disney Corporation, but it reassured Walt Disney that his dream of animated feature-length films was not only achievable, but could be profitable. The next year, Disney would release their next animated feature, Pinocchio, in 1940. Entire scenes of the film are dedicated to showcasing the meticulous cel animation, every movement, every detail perfectly crafted by master artists. Just like Snow White, the spectacle of the medium elevated the film to something more than it would have been without it. And now it's 2024, and a weird thing has been happening. Between people's love of nostalgia, Hollywood running out of ideas, and who knows what else, there have been a lot of remakes hitting the big screen and streaming markets. Specifically, live-action remakes of animated properties. And I've gotta say, I don't like it. At least, I don't feel good about it. Even Disney themselves, who pioneered the feature animated film, have been releasing movie after movie, remakes of their own properties with less color, character, and story than the original. And I don't mean to discredit the work of the hundreds of talented artists who helped make those movies possible, but I think it's fair to say that all these remakes have a much more cash-grabby feel about them than the originals. But this video isn't about how bad live-action remakes can be. No, we're here to talk about the actual issue that these movies can bring. The idea that animated movies and animation in general isn't good enough. America has an interesting relationship with animation. Most often, the only animated projects you see are geared towards children and younger audiences. This isn't bad and actually makes a lot of sense. The over-the-top character design, big acting, big colors, and frequent use of songs, these are all traits that can be a lot more attention-grabbing than live action. However, audiences have gotten it into their heads that the things that make animation great, those crazy characters, colors, and music, should be left at the kids' table, and that the maturity of live action media is better by default. This couldn't be further from the truth. Animated shows and movies can dive into some pretty deep topics and explore them in really creative ways. In my opinion, the more obvious presentation of a character's motivations and a project's themes makes it a lot stronger than a live-action counterpart. Whenever I have this discussion, my mind immediately goes to Avatar: The Last Airbender. And with the live-action remake recently put on Netflix, I decided to rewatch the original series. It's perfect. There's no other way to describe it. Every character is completely fleshed out and relatable. The setting is whimsical and fun while also giving off a real sense of danger and feeling lived in. The creators of the show used every single detail they could think of to help tell the story. Characters' pasts, their locations throughout the show, the length of their hair. It all plays a role in getting the themes of the show portrayed and telling the story. And it does it in a way that live action could never do. Spoilers for Avatar going forward. If you haven't seen it, please make your life better and watch it. Now, I mean it, close this video, that's way more important. But please come back. In the first few episodes, Aang has to come to grips with the fact that he's the Avatar who abandoned the world on the brink of war. After running away from his destiny, he wakes up 100 years later to see that the Fire Nation has all but won. While this is disastrous enough for any protagonist, the creators of the show really emphasize that he is only 12 years old. Technically 112, but ice years don't count.
I haven't done this since I was a kid! You still are a kid!
And the animation helps show the audience that Aang still is a kid. You don't just hear the characters talk about it, you see the funny faces they make. You see him get hyper and move around in ways that no human could. The animation tells the story. About halfway through book 1, I decided to give the live-action show a try. I thought, if this ends up bringing more people into the world of Avatar, I guess that's a net positive. Maybe it's not so bad. I ended up turning the show off after the first 5 minutes. First of all, it opens on a scene of spies infiltrating the Fire Nation and stealing information before the war, or something. I didn't rewatch it for this video, I couldn't. And from the beginning, the plot is more complicated than it needs to be. Episode 1 of the animated series is called The Boy in the Iceberg. You may not know totally what the story is about yet, but you know that boy is going to be important. That, mixed with some obvious but well-placed exposition at the beginning of the first episode, gives you everything you need to understand the story and the events that are about to unfold. By starting the live-action series with a fight scene, even with the iconic bending system of the series, you change the focus of the show from character-driven to action-driven. The remake spends a bunch of unnecessary time setting up the war and the big players of the war, and it really doesn't matter at this point. It takes the remake more time to get to the actual heart of the characters and their motivations. Which is another reason these live-action remakes seem to fall flat. They're made for people who already love the original product, not people who are new to it. If I've never been exposed to the world of Avatar, I don't get any gratification from seeing Sozin in the opening scene. He's literally just some guy. Because the creators are banking on the audience already knowing what's going to happen, they don't spend the time they need to explore the characters and explain their motivations. Instead, they decide to focus more on spectacle and action. And Avatar is far from the only show who's guilty of doing this. If you want to adapt something, you need to make sure it stands as its own piece of art, not just tethered to the original. You can't just assume the audience is going to know what happens. That's what makes your remake bad. Anyway, let's dissect the fight scene. When seeing bending in live action, it is immediately clear how silly it looks. Don't get me wrong, the effects look good and are well done, but when you're throwing magic rocks at high velocity at other people and they're just fine, you realize how unrealistic the whole magic system is. When bending is presented in animation, the audience has a much easier time suspending their disbelief. It's not the real world. It doesn't have to look real. And they don't try to make it look real. They try to make it look as good as possible. That's what makes it work. I never once questioned how real the bending looked in the animated series. It's beautiful, fluid, and always dazzles me. In the remake, I found myself trying to look for mistakes or parts that didn't look as good, and laughing out loud when a guy literally gets torched head to toe and walks it off. The show has real people in it, but the bending doesn't look real, because it's not, and it really took me out of the story. A lot of articles quoted the showrunners of the remake, saying that they wanted it to be darker than the original, and they were going to do that by tossing out some episodes from the original that didn't immediately contribute to the plot of them getting to the North Pole, essentially filler episodes. First off, let me remind you that the show is about a 12-year-old who has to face the consequences of running away from his duty to find the entire world scarred and divided all because he wasn't there. With everyone and everything he knew and loved gone, his only chance to make things right is to kill this unstoppable evil figure, an act that is strictly against everything he believes in, and do it within a year. If you think that needs to get darker, I would talk to someone. But the other great part about Avatar is that it's fun and funny and silly, and it wears that with pride. So many jokes in the show make me laugh out loud every time I hear them. So many wacky animation sequences make me cackle just as much as admire them. Those episodes that were thrown out, the ones that didn't contribute to the plot, were where the characters got to grow and shine the most. We see Aang, Katara, and Sokka travel to so many different places and meet so many people with different ideals, beliefs, and priorities that challenge how the characters think about the world that they're trying to save. In art, be it theater, film, painting, if you want to make something dark, it all comes down to contrast. You need light to make the dark seem dark. Think of the opening scene in Up. Because we were shown how happy life could be, we don't need to be told how sad the sad parts are. We get it. We completely understood both the good and the bad within 5 minutes with no dialogue. And with animation, you can make those contrasts even bigger, using lighting, color, sound design, even the animation style. There's a term in the art world that I actually learned through vocal pedagogy in school. It's called chiaroscuro, literally translating to light and dark. You need both together in harmony. Push and pull. Life and death. Good and evil, yin and yang. By getting rid of the comedy and the lightheartedness in the show, you're making it something else entirely. For every great battle or perfectly executed bending sequence, there's a scene where Toph makes a blind joke or Sokka gets trapped in the ground. It's a perfect balance that isn't the same in the live-action remake.
So what is this video really about? I took my glasses off so the light isn't reflecting in them. I can talk about how great Avatar is for hours, but talking about remakes that don't stand the test of time isn't the big issue here. Like I said earlier, what I think the big issue is that live-action remakes instill this idea that animation isn't good enough for older audiences. I may be a little biased here. I have a really strong affinity towards animated movies, especially ones that are geared towards children. I mean, I cry every time I watch Kung Fu Panda 2. And Kung Fu Panda 1. And Kung Fu Panda 3. 4 was alright. And even when I'm watching something live action, the more childlike and whimsical it is, usually the more I like it. I'm specifically thinking of live theater, where the audience has to completely suspend their disbelief and trust the people on stage to tell the story. Plays like Peter and the Starcatcher or The Old Man and the Old Moon continually inspire me with their minimalist approach to set, lighting, props, and storytelling. I love a good show for adults, don't get me wrong. I am always down to rewatch Breaking Bad or most of Game of Thrones, but something about cartoons just hit different for me. And I want others to have that same feeling, regardless of what age they are. But with more and more resources going into making live-action remakes, less resources are going into the conception and production of original animated stories. And I think that's sad.
The solution? I'm not sure. As much as I may not enjoy the live-action remakes of The Lion King or Pinocchio, they bring in a lot of money. Why wouldn't they keep making them? To gamble on a property that nobody knows anything about? I get the business behind it, but I'm not a businessman. I'm an artist. And these are just my thoughts. I'd love to hear yours in the comments below. Again, I don't really want to trash these remakes. A lot of people worked really hard on them, and if a kid can see themselves in a character that they couldn't before, that's genuinely fantastic. I more want to celebrate an artistic medium that constantly pushes the boundaries of what it is and how it tells stories. Let me know what your favorite animated shows and movies are. And if you found value in this video, I would really appreciate you clicking all the buttons and doing all the things. Thanks for listening to me ramble, everybody. See you in the next one.